rate is of currents, you have to ask yourself, what did you just see? And something incredible happens. The other day I felt there's like these beetles on my ankle, and I'm glad it doesn't happen a second day. But if you don't note these things, it would be as if it never occurred, even though it was so odd. No, it was my foot that was inflamed for like 4 months, and then it was in a boot. I took it out of a medical boot, and my ankle has been tight AF for weeks on end. And I think that was like a turning point in it. We have turned the corner. I saw it crowing at a distance. I thought it was a bald eagle because it had a piece of bread in its mouth. If you've never been confused like this at a distance, things are illusions. But that can be something good because it can get it into fruition when it's at a sweet spot. I fancy this as like what kaleidoscopes are, because they're set at just the right length in order for it to emerge. And it's the phenomenon where you spin the wheel and more of it comes into it in an interplay from its inner scope. And when your body's in a homeostasis, it's like a giant game of a kaleidoscope. When something goes wrong, your temperature gets off. That's why they hit you with the heat gun, to see if you're further from where you should be. And this is all locally, it's just a derivation, but it's a real representation. And so in the cardinal rule, or the golden rule, I don't like using cardinal because what they've done in the Vatican is a joke on its face, saying that they'll bless aliens and they'll bless people who aren't straight. I don't think that would make Jesus happy one bit. But this, the thing is, like, that's why Jesus cursed the fig tree. It's because fig trees, it looks like they are big, fruitful, and plentiful, but close up, they're really not, and their fruit sucks. So with this crow, when it got closer, I could see that it was not a bald eagle, because the white bread in its mouth wasn't its head. It was in its beak. And so this is huge when it comes to seeing what's synthetic and then what would be natural. And it's just, the hard part is that some things natural are better synthetic when you're in your latter state. And I'm middle-aged, so I can say that. So if you have like Tron and it's a video game, polygons of the video game industry are like 32. This guy knows I'm not in a school zone. But the video games of the industry are all off polygons. And even if there aren't, they deviate. Like the earlier ones are sprites. Sprites can be represented as polygons. It's just they're more fleshed out, so the game has more of a design. But back into the earlier ones, they were more and more linear off of polygons. The sprites are on top of polygons fleshed together. Like in chemistry, when there's chemical bonds, and this is what I wanted to talk about earlier, I just remembered. When things aren't explained properly in science, it could be because of like a chemical bond is like a connector, and you don't want to have it really that layman in term, because they don't know why chemical bonds are bonds. And so like in the small reasons, you know, like when a kid keeps asking, okay, but why? And then why? And then why? And then you have to explain why the sky is blue, why the sky is made up of water, water is blue, why water is made up of the molecule hydrogen and oxide, and these are like water. And then he's like, but then why? And then fourth why? Well, because hydrogen's the most abundant property in the universe. And then he goes, and then why? Well, because hydrogen is the simplest structure in molecules. And then he asks again, then why? You know, this is like 5th degree of derivation. But it's all just to wish-wash what bonds are. They don't know why bonds occur. They run off what Hooke's law is. And this is something like that they would just breeze over. Like when someone says, I'm 90 years old, I can do this calisthenic, look at me. And their 90-year-old does like one or two of them to represent an entire set that they want you to do. The same can be said mentally in science in explaining like just these nuts. I fancy it like how people puts in like screws into your foot because there's nothing better. But it's so archaic that they're literally putting a screw into your foot. The same can be said with like CRISPR editing systems of genealogy, is where in these vector sites, that's all it is. It's just like a sloppy copy of a chemical bond. And these chemical bonds, I don't know what I should label this, because this is what a red herring is. So just call it what red herrings are. The aesthetic of when there's like a bar inside of the structure that's made. And you see this in synthetics, or if you can see it in a natural setting, it would be like a Riemann sum or a Rayleigh scattering. And so when there's like these, lastly, a chemical bond is what Hooke's law is. And so when molecules are interacting and accelerating off each other, which would mean breaking, that means that a spring would be breaking. And it's like Hooke's law, a spring can get broken if given enough pressure. And that's all Hooke's law is. The recoil on this stuff is what chemical bonds, what bonds them are like spring-like. So imagine that's a perfect analogy of one. Sheriff's in town. So my eyes are better than the camera. The lens on it doesn't quite span out that far. But back to these video games, is that these polygons and sprites, fascinating representation of what Cleveland sites and gene CRISPR editing are. And then with the chemical bonds on top. And this is really a great way to, I already said synthetically, you see it is night and day, but don't get confused with naturally, that the same dynamic is like Rayleigh scattering. A lot of these are notes for myself, but this was one that you would like. Croquet is a lot like golf, but it's more of a video game arcade-like, because you have to hit stuff through these wires, these tunnel wires in croquet. And so it's like golf on steroids. So arcade is like a lot of sports on steroids. Just the aesthetic of it. I saw this watching pinball. They were taking it serious. They're like, yeah, the weather will change the way that you play the game with the pinball because the screws tighten. I mean, it's an entire assembly line of workers who put this together. I'm like, yes, but only to a certain degree. It's more so the something of the table that's bent upwards, so it slides down with the normal force. That ball, you're playing with the normal force the whole time. This is why with a step, if you have like a track or at a gym or a track, you know, that's rubber kind of, isn't that like nylon hardened? And so if you put a plastic block on top of it, the more plastic blocks you set on top is going to be slippier and slippier, that you apply pressure on top of these blocks because the normal force is waning. And this recoil, if you're on the receiving end, will slip out and you'll enter a really fast spurt of motion. This is what sprites do to polygons in video games. They flesh them out. They flesh them out, puts the lotion in the basket. So I fancy Frolf, if you can envision croquet as arcade-like version of golf, Frolf would be like Tron. And it's not just because they both have discs, it's the aesthetic of polygons. If you were to enamor Frolf, it's disc golfing with polygons, it would be a lot like Tron. Don't ask why, it just, if you're gonna relate arcade croquet to golf, Tron to disc Frolf is right up that alley. And side note, the game Conan the Barbarian, it's not a game, it's a movie. I've never watched the movie, but when you've got a costume like that, it'd look good in a game, but it just looks stupid on the screen. So in a video game playing Tron, because Tron you enter into a video game and it's got all these different video games, I would guess there's a sector in Tron with all different video games. Enter it in like Jumanji or The Matrix. You know, The Matrix is an extension of Tron, like a plugin. So in Tron, I would play Conan the Barbarian. But this is just like with this open world in Tron. So it would be a movie of Tron with the doubling of Conan the Barbarian as Matrix. That'd be sick.